New Bedford is a game of historic whaling and town building set in 19th century New England. It is a game that I picked up at Gen Con 2016. Earlier this year, I played its smaller version, Nantucket. You can see my review for it. There are similar concepts here, but this is the bigger brother, and it's a quite different beast from that one. New Bedford, so town building and whaling. You even have two different boards to represent that. And you also have a personal board. Each player will have one that will help you keep your belongings organized. Now, how does the game work? Well, each player gets one of these boards here. Each player had two ships that they need to prepare and then launch on that board. Each turn the players will place their little puppets, little meeples, their action tokens, on various areas in the town. The town will grow so that more actions will become available. When you have the resources, you will launch your ship. Your ship will be launched in one of these locations here. The further you launch it, the longer it will stay out at sea, and the better chance it will have to get good whales. You will draw random whales that will be assigned to the players that are out at sea. When a ship reaches port, so that is, completes its journey, comes back home, you will need to pay your sailors. So the more ships you have, the more cash you need to have at hand. And that generates cash, generates points. Actually, that generates points. It costs cash, but it generates victory points. More in detail. As I said, you start with a small town here, and this is the board that you place in the middle of the table. You also have these tokens here that are placed face down. Now they're stacked, but in a regular game they will be out there, spread out, so that people can see what's available, and people can build these buildings by paying the corresponding number of resources. For example, here you need to pay 3 wood and a brick to build this building here. Then I flip it to the other side. The arrow on top here tells me what the building does, and here I have icons that also remind me of that. So I will, as the game proceeds, the town will become bigger and bigger, but the general idea during the action phase, which is the first phase of each turn, remains. The idea is that you place your action guys on areas here. The basic areas are the ones on the board that is at the on the table at the beginning of the game, and then you have more advanced, usually more profitable actions that are added later. As you can see, buildings will give you advantages. There is an advantage for the first player that gets maximum use, maximum benefits out of that building, and then other players may also place their action token there, but they get less stuff. They get benefits that are not nearly as good. For example, if I go to the general store, I may sell my stuff for wood and food. This is food. Wood and food are worth $1, and break is worth $2. The first player gets an extra $1. Here I get to collect 3 food if I'm the first player, 2 food otherwise, 2 plus 1. The warehouse, I get to collect break anyways, no matter when, and also as the first player I get an extra resource, and the forest I get extra. The forest I get extra, I get wood, and if I'm the first player I also get extra wood. When I have some resources, I may decide to build a building, in which case I select that action, which is again build a building, which is buy one of these tokens here, flip it to the other side, and add it to your area of the board. This is important. As you can see, I put the area here, but in a certain sense, maybe sometimes you put it at an angle because each side has to face a player clearly, so that we know exactly whom the buildings belong to. These 2 buildings have been built by and belong to the player sitting here. These 2 buildings belong to and have been built by the player that is sitting here. Because when you are using a building that has been built by someone else, you have to pay them. You give them a coin, you give them $1. So that is good. That is good. So go around and perform these actions that will allow you to generate income. You collect goods, wood, food, and bricks. Get your little engine of resources, and then you'll start considering going out to whaling, which is a great way to score points. Here you have 2 more actions, actually 2 more actions. One is to prepare a ship for 2 wood. So you simply take one of your 2 ships, you can have up to 2, one of your 2 ships, and you place it somewhere here. We place them here like to indicate that they are ready. They're not in your personal supply. They're ready, but they haven't been launched yet, and you use that action. If you're the first player, it costs less to prepare a ship. And then the other action is to launch a ship, which of course you need to have prepared before. And the position where you launch it depends on the number of food that you load on the ship. So pretty much the more food you invest on your little expedition, the further you can put your ship along this track here. So for food, for example, I can put it there. As you can see, they are marked. They're marked by numbers that indicate where they go. And I can have up to 2 ships out at sea at the same time, because that's the maximum that you have. This is during the action phase. Build buildings, use their abilities. You can also always pay 3 coin to buy 2 food, or 3 coin to buy 2 wood if you just want those resources and you do not want to spend an action, because actions are so precious. So use those actions, build buildings, prepare your ships, and launch them. Once the action phase is over, then you have the movement phase, and then finally the whaling phase. The movement phase, the ships that are there will move simply by 1 space closer to the return area. When a ship reaches the return area, then it's back home, and it's time to cash in the whales that you will have hopefully caught. So you will have placed whales that you caught on your little player aid here, and when it is time to go home, you will cash them in if you can afford to pay the people that help, if you can afford to pay your crew. The total you need to pay is indicated by the total cost on the whale tokens that you have acquired. In this case, I need to pay a total of 8. If I don't have them, then I need to sell these to the supply, to the banks, the supply, so I can get the cash to buy some other of my own whales, but then other players can buy those whales. So really make sure you have enough cash so you can actually bring home all of the whales that you caught. Once you paid for all of the whales that you have, or in any case for all the ones that you can afford, finally you take these tokens and you put them in your personal supply area. So you move those ships and potentially cash in. After that is done, then we get to the actual whaling, where players will draw from this bag here. You draw a number of whale tokens equal to the number of ships on the board plus 1, and then in order from highest to lowest, players will get a pick. You have 2 ships, well, they belong to the same player in this example, but suppose they belong to different players. Then we have these 3 whales here, and maybe first player will get this one, second player will get this one. However, as the game continues, the bag with the whale token starts getting depleted as the whales are caught, and you have these tokens that are there from the beginning of the game, but at the beginning it's easy to avoid them because players catch whales. But later on, the whale pool becomes depleted, these guys become much more common, and so it may be the case that since the number of tokens available, a number of players plus 1, if several of these guys come out, then the last player or 2 will get nothing. They will be stuck with a useless water token, which is later added back to the bag. So the pool of whales is worsened as the game continues. So it's really important you go out as soon as you can, catch whales when there's still many good ones around, and maybe later concentrate on building buildings. But of course it's a very fine line, because if you build the right buildings or you use the right buildings, then you're able to launch and build your ships effectively to maximize your resources, etc., etc. So you need to really keep these 2 things together. The game continues until the end of round 12. On this side of that, on the whaling track, you have the is the track that you use to keep track of a number of turns. At the end of turn 12, you score points. You score points from the whales that you caught. The number in the top right corner is the number of points that each whale is worth. Also, you have several buildings that, if you build, give you victory points at the end. Finally, each $5 that you still have in your personal supply, in your personal coffin, under your mattress, each 5 such dollars are worth a victory point. You total the victory points, and the player with the highest total is the winner of the game. I like New Bedford. I like New Bedford. It is not a hardcore game in any sense, but it definitely has a lot of interesting moving parts. If nothing else, the fact that you need to plan ahead and build a certain resource engine and buy some things so you can buy some other things so that you can prepare your ship so that then you can launch, etc., etc. There are various steps that need to be taken, and you have to figure out, of course, the most efficient way of doing that. Per se, that feels fairly dry, almost feels like homework, but it becomes interesting when you consider that the game design gives you two challenges, basically. One is that actions are so precious. Those two meeples that you have to figure out many ways, many things that you need to do with them. You have to prioritize. You have to make very hard choices about what you want to get. There is a building that gives you an extra action, but the extra action that you take is only one of the basic actions, can now be one of the actions based on buildings that have been built later, which are of course more profitable. So it gives you more flexibility, but still is not a silver bullet that solves every situation. So a very tight gameplay there. I don't feel that a single mistake can be particularly punishing, but if you start squandering 2-3 actions, well, then probably you're starting to fall behind, especially if the players are efficient. The other challenge that the design brings is the interaction, which is not direct interactions, not so much about I'm going to attack you with my artillery and then my cavalry charge is going to finish you off. That's war games. It's interaction in the sense that I'm depleting resources before you go. Or depleting, in part depleting is correct when we're talking about whaling, but when thinking about the town is more about I'm using the best resources because I get the advantage for first player and I'm leaving you resources that are perfectly good but not as good. So it is also a lot about timing, about thinking what the opponent is doing. If you get a sense of what the players that go behind before you are going to do, you're going to have a huge advantage. When I think back about, for example, a game that I played, I realized that if I had figured out what the opponent wanted to do, my standing in the game would have been very different. And that will happen all the time. So reading the opponents is very important, and it may not appear so as you read the rulebook, you set up the game, and you start playing it, and then you realize, how come that I'm always second in every darn place where I want to go? Of course, because the opponents have figured out where I wanted to go, and they're taking that. And they're taking the best spot in that place. So more interaction that it appears at first. Nice tight gameplay. You will enjoy it if you like the challenge there. The idea that you have actions to do and a lot of ways in which you can perform that. But it's not a casual game in the sense like I'll go and do something and see what happens. Because if you do that, you're just gonna be destroyed by everybody else, by those that are actually paying attention, committing to the design and taking it as a serious design that is, I wouldn't say again over punishing, but to an extent rewards a good gameplay and does not allow a lot of leeway for casual gameplay, which is, of course, what serious players of board games will want. The two main parts, the town and the whaling, feel very different because the town is so airtight. There is no random factor there. Again, it's all about reading the opponents and maximizing chains of actions that you will want to perform. The whaling phase has a random element, but also there, in truth, it's fairly minor because if you have a ship that is out at sea when no one else has a ship, you're gonna get the stuff. If you place yourself in a certain position and you get to draw before somebody else, then most likely you'll get something good, and people the die in the last positions will get not such good stuff. So it feels like it's a it's a fairly limited random factor, and one where your chances of getting something good can be manipulated by game effects. Also, game effects that will affect your position on the waiting board. So yes, it is about a randomly determined pool of shared resources, and then within that, the order in which you get your pick can be manipulated in various ways. In that sense, it feels that if you get the good stuff, it's because usually you get the good pick, which is usually a function of something that you did. So it's a limited random factor. It's not like a random factor where if I roll a 6, I get a resource, and if I roll a 1, I don't, and it may just be that my opponent keeps rolling resources and I never do. You know, when you have games where random factor is individually based and will affect somebody and not somebody else. Here, the random element of the wailing board is much more organic, and so it doesn't bother me at all. Actually, I do think that the two elements really go together well. They feel much more organic. The transition is much more fluid than I would expect. If nothing else, because you may have been very lucky, you got a lot of whales, and then if you didn't plan ahead and you do not have the money to pay your people when you land, then those whales actually will go to your opponents. And maybe didn't go out whaling as much, but realize that you had a disastrous economic situation, so are just waiting for you at the harbor to buy your whales, so when you won't be able to retrieve them when you finally arrive home. So very nice elements there. The game also comes with an expansion that adds a 5th player, adds other modes of playing, and also adds more buildings. And I think that's an important addition, because as much as I think it is a good design, I think that after a couple of plays, experienced players will figure out certain chains of actions, will start falling enamored with certain algorithms, or at least certain heuristics that will tend to present itself over time, will appear as better than others, not necessarily in an absolute sense, but if I'm playing with other people that haven't figured those out, then I'm going to be able to do my strategy and I'm going to win. So with more buildings, you have more variety. People will have to figure out strategies on the fly, and that just adds that replay element, not just replay element, but it adds that uncertainty element that I like very much, that forces you to take each game as its own thing. You are benefiting from an experience that you gained before, but not excessively, and you still have the challenge of adapting your previous knowledge with what the game is offering. So New Bedford, definitely a good game. I recommend it. It's a strong Euro game, much better with the expansion, but in general and overall a pretty good game.